Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of our SQL DBA Interview Mastery Series. Today, we are discussing a question that looks simple but many experienced DBAs to struggle. Explain SQL Server Architecture. Now, here is the interesting part. Because I have interviewed candidates with 10 plus years experience, but who could explain always on backup strategies, disaster recovery, and performance tuning. But when I asked about architecture, they started listing components like relational engine, storage engine, buffer pool, TempDB, transaction log, and then stopped. The answer was technically correct, but it was not impressive. Today, I am going to show you how interviewers think and how to answer this question like a senior DBA. Stay until the end because I will also share the exact answer that usually makes interviewers stop writing notes and start paying attention. So let me ask you a question. What interviewers are actually testing during the interview? For example, when they ask about the explain SQL Server Architecture, do they want to see if you memorized a diagram? No, right? They want to know if you understand how SQL Server works internally, right? Because if you understand the architecture, you can troubleshoot performance problems. You can understand the pain points. You can understand the memory issues. You can understand storage bottlenecks. You can understand why queries become slow. Architecture is basically not a diagram, right? So architecture is the foundation for troubleshooting. If you understand this, you can easily troubleshoot and you can able to find the performance pain points and the SQL Server internals as well. For example, user says the application is slow. So how do you troubleshoot? The solution is not let's restart the SQL Server. That's not the perfect solution. The solution starts with understanding the architecture, right? So obviously, whenever we ask a question about explain the SQL Server architecture, few DBAs they list out the components instead of explaining the complete flow, end-to-end flow. They'll say the relational engine, storage engine, buffer pool, TempDB, transaction log, data files, and log files. But this is not a wrong answer. But if I were interviewing you, I would immediately ask, but how does SQL Server actually process a request? How the request comes from the user, how it processed internally, that you need to explain. Because this answer tells me you memorized components. If you tell this like these are the components like relational engine, storage, buffer pool, TempDB, so I'll think of it you memorized just components, but you didn't understand the complete SQL Server internals. I feel that. To impress the interviewer, you have to say clear concept with the not memorization, right? This answer fails because you are not explaining the end-to-end process flow, end-to-end request flow, and you are not mentioning how do you troubleshoot, right? Where does the query goes? How does the SQL Server find the data? Why is memory important? When does disk get involved? How does SQL Server recover after a crash? The architecture answer should answer these questions, not simply listing out the components. You may know the process, but at the time of interview, when the interviewer asks, then you are getting stuck. You are just explaining these are the components available, this is the workflow, and you are not explaining the clear workflow as well. Because of this is the basic SQL architecture, right? So without knowing the architecture, you can't able to troubleshoot the performance pain points and other parts. So you have to clearly explain the SQL Server internals, how the request is going, right? For example, if a 5 years experienced DBA, how he can answer, how he need to answer like a pro to impress the interviewer. You can say, if you are a 5 years experienced guy and the interviewer asks, explain the SQL Server Architecture. You can say, SQL Server Architecture consists of relational engine, storage engine, and the relational engine parses and optimizes the query. The storage engine retrieves the data from memory or disk. Buffer pool, TempDB, transaction log, data files and log files support performance and recoverability. This is enough. This is enough for most mid-level DBA interviews. If you support 20 to 30 SQL instances or up to 100 SQL servers, this answer is perfectly realistic. This answer is perfectly realistic. Okay. Simply say, don't overcomplicate the answer. When you are explaining the architecture, don't complicate it. Just say clearly, stating that SQL Server consists of the relational engine and storage engine. The relational engine parses and optimizes the queries. The storage engine retrieves the data from memory or disk. Buffer pool, TempDB, transaction log, data files and log files supports performances and recoverability. How this is very short and sweet. Interviewer will impress this one, definitely, because a good 5 years DBA answer should be clear, structured, accurate. The goal is not to sound like an architect. The goal is to demonstrate solid fundamentals. Many candidates lose interviews because they try to sound more experienced than they really are. Interviewers notices that immediately, right? So if you are having up to 5 years experience, if interviewer asks, explain the SQL Server Architecture, don't go with the textbook answers. Okay, simply explain the complete end-to-end workflow. It should be very less than 30 seconds or less than a minute. You have to clearly explain and the interviewer should be impressed. They should not be bored. They should not be feel bored. Simply say SQL Server consists of relational engine and storage engine. The relational engine parses and optimizes the query, simple point, and the storage engine retrieves the data from memory or disk. Buffer pool, TempDB, transaction log files, data files and log files supports performance and recoverability. Okay. So why this 5 years answer works? Because you are clearly explaining the components. You are clearly explaining the purpose. You are clearly mentioning the how we can recover the data with the help of this SQL internals. And you are clearly showcasing you understand the concept of SQL Server architecture, right? For example, if you are more than 5+ years or 10+ years experience, don't complicate at all. I would say if interviewer asks any question, don't complicate the things. Keep it short, make sure it should be understandable and clear and short. Okay. For example, if I am giving the interview, if I am having 10+ years experience, I'll say simply, I explain SQL Server Architecture as a request processing pipeline, because you are little bit more experienced. So you need to change the words. Like I explain the SQL Server Architecture as a request processing pipeline. Queries are parsed, optimized, and converted into execution plans. The storage engine retrieves data from buffer pool or disk, and whatever the changes are logged before data pages are written into the log file. This understanding helps us to identify CPU, memory, TempDB, and storage bottlenecks. See, notice the difference. The answer is not talking about components. The answer is talking about the complete flow. That's the secret. Senior DBAs explain SQL Server as a request processing pipeline. Don't say SQL Server follows client server architecture. Whenever user performs any action, that will be converted in the form of query. Don't say like that. That's the textbook answer. It's the I have seen many interviews, right? This is my personal experience. So don't overcomplicate it. Answer should be very clear and you are not talking about the component, you are talking the complete flow. And senior DBAs have little bit changed the words and the flow, right? So you can say I explained SQL Server Architecture as a request processing pipeline. Queries are parsed, optimized, and converted into execution plans. And the storage engine retrieves the data from buffer pool or disk, and the changes are logged before databases are written. This understanding helps to identify CPU, memory, TempDB, and storage bottlenecks. So let's break down why this 10-year answer works. You are focusing on request flow. The answer discusses how query enters into the SQL Server, how the query is optimized, because after parsing the query is optimizing, how the data is retrieved, how changes are recorded, right? How performance problem occurs. This sounds like someone who works in production every day. They can modify the sentence, right? The panel impress this answer. You can also say, if you remember one answer from today's, remember this. The reason is this answer works is because it sounds practical. It sounds like someone who solves the problem, not someone who memorizes the interview question. Okay, let me give you a real world example. For example, user reported that a critical report was taking 45 minutes. Some team members in the DBA immediately started tuning the query. But first, we need to look at the architecture flow. The wait statistics showed the page IO latch waits. That means SQL Server was waiting for data pages from disk to write the operation. The real issue was not the query. The real issue was storage latency, right? After improving storage and memory configuration, report execution dropped from 45 minutes to 5 minutes. This is why architecture knowledge matters. So if you want to impress the panel, you can say, I don't view SQL Server Architecture as a collection of components. I view it as the complete life cycle of a request. If you want to impress the panel, you can also say the previous answer, but if you want to impress the panel, you can say, I don't view SQL Server Architecture as a collection of components. I view it as a complete life cycle of a request. Understanding where a request spends time helps to identify and eliminate the bottlenecks efficiently. This is little bit strong, but it will impress the panel, right? So as I mentioned, if any user reporting that the query is taking 45 minutes, and you will identify the page IO latch waits is identified and the storage latency found. So after improving the storage or memory, automatically the report completed less than 5 minutes, right? So obviously once you complete this architecture answer, then you will get some additional questions, follow-up questions as well. So what is buffer pool? What is checkpoint? What is lazy writer? Obviously we will get these questions because these are all the SQL Server internal components. What is dirty page? What is read ahead file? What is page IO latch? Sometimes this page IO latch will come at the last during the performance tuning interviews, performance concept when they are asking related to performance part. But these follow-up questions will come in this SQL Server Architecture because these are all the internal components. So if a panel wants to ask a scenario based question, so he can say application is suddenly slow. So as a 5 years experienced guy, what he will check? First, he will check the CPU, he will check the memory, he will check the disk, he will check is there any blockings, and he will check is there any plans are running, is there any jobs are running during that time. But if the 10 years experienced guy, what he will check? But first he will connect to the SQL Server and he will check what are the wait stats are currently on the system, what is the memory pressure, what is the disk latency, what is the temp DB, and the execution plan. So based on the experience it may varies. Okay, so as a 5 years guy, obviously when any user raises a request stating that the query is taking longer time, or the application is too slow, because I have seen many DBAs who is having 5 years experience. First they will check the CPU utilization, memory utilization, disk utilization, blockings, and then jobs. But when it comes to the 10 years experience guy, he know why it is taking longer time. Is it because of weight statistics, or is it because of memory pressure, or is it because of disk latency, or is it because of any temp DB or execution plans? The thinking is little bit changed when we are answering the question. If interviewer asks a decision making question, for example, he finds some disk latency issue, or he finds some memory pressure. So after adding additional RAM or upgrading the storage, then what you can say, you have identified the bottleneck first. Memory pressure needs RAM, storage weight need faster storage. If you want to improve the storage, then if you want to improve the performance and to avoid the disk latency, you have to improve the disk performance. Or if there is any memory pressure, you need to increase the RAM. It is completely based on weight statistics or disk latency, right? So architecture cheat sheet. For example, if someone asks you to clearly explain the architecture, you can say, keep this in mind. When the request is coming from the application, first it will go to the parser in the relational engine, and then it optimizes the query and it generates an execution plan, and execution plan will ask for the data from storage engine. Storage engine will pull the data from buffer pool or memory, and it will also if there is any data which is not available in memory, it pulls the required data from disk, and the results will be sent to the application. So simple and short, right? So if you understand this architecture, junior DBAs explain the components because they are having less experience. But what I can say is, don't explain the textbook answers. First understand the SQL architecture and the internal components, how the request is going from end to end. Senior DBAs explain the request flow. Architects explain the business impact. Right. So hope you understand how to answer a question like explain about the SQL Server architecture. But what I would say, you have to explain less than a minute. Don't overcomplicate the topic. Okay, keep it short and explain. Let it come the follow-up questions like buffer pool, lazy writer, let it come. But whenever you are answering a question, keep it short and impress the panel. Okay, so we'll meet in the next episode. Until then, thank you. Bye.